For those that don't know me, my name is Kirsten. I'm currently working for Wits Reproductive Health and HIV Institute, but that sounds very medical and very public health, which it is. But my real passion is around community development, change, understanding around trauma, and supporting both individuals and communities. And just want to say thanks to everyone. I've just really enjoyed the last 2 days already. Just it's so great to be with like-minded people, instead of having to try and convince my colleagues every day that the value and the importance of mental health is really key, and understanding around violence. It's just great having a baseline that everyone recognizes that value. And even though we're not always agreeing, that there's a space for debate and discussion. And so I hope that continues in today as well. I think also from a social work background, I really just love the sharing and the linking of mental health, psychosocial, peace building. I'm just like, yes, this is my language. This is how we talk. And so it's just been really exciting, just holding that individual in the context and how it's impacting the individual. And I just wanted to start with a quote from a community psychologist in Cape Town. She says, it needs to be recognized that the emotional consequences of living in a conflictual society are not adequately represented through the reference of psychiatric symptomology. Instead, they exist in more profound ways. They are harder to measure in code. They exist in people's ideas about themselves, their country, and their future. So, although this morning's discussion is around bringing together some of our themes and discussions, and linking in some of our experiences to date. So we're going to be starting with the video of Amal's organization. Maybe just briefly to say, Amal is the clinical director, also a lecturer, researcher. I've lost the card. She wears many different spaces, many different hats. And this is just sharing some of the experience and the work of her organization.
Thank you. Have been honored by being here. Thank you for IJR and the World Trauma Foundation. I enjoyed it. Very exciting. I will come back to Sudan and convey your message and do our best to share the knowledge I get from here with my colleagues back home. And thank you so much. And I hope we'll get from this conference with a lot and continue in working together and not waiting till the next conference. Thank you. This video is about how we are trying to move from individual to community healing.
بين المركز الأحفاد اللي بيعنى بالأشخاص المتعرضين للصدمات النفسية الناتجة عن حروب أو صراعات أو الكثير من المشاكل المجتمعية، إنه تعاوننا مع جمعية World Trauma Foundation. World Trauma Foundation هي جمعية متخصصة لعلاج المجتمعات ككل المتعرضة للصدمات، مقرها في أمستردام هولندا. والنتج من التعاون بيناتنا دي سلسلة من التدريبات ابتدأت من العام 2011 ديسمبر 2011 إلى وقتنا هذا في 2014. كانت سلسلة من التدريبات المتخصصة. آخرها كان التدريب فيما يسمى بمسرح السرد أو الناراتيف ثياتر.
emphasizes that things aren't happening just as a once-off. It is a process of healing. It is not just narrative theatre as an event for entertainment. And by going back to that community a number of times, by visiting different issues, by transferring problem solving into different contexts, you create a possibility for people to internalize critical thinking again around issues and drawing on methods that they used in the past to solve problems and to stay stronger. And according to the behavior change theory that we used, how to walk very closely alongside the community to create a change that could help them to be stronger.
المشهد اللي احنا حنشاهده الآن بيجسد كيفية إنه الشباب الداخلين على مسرح السرد استعدادهم قبل الدخول في المسرحية أو المشهد الداخلين به للمجتمع المحلي، وهم فيما بيناتهم كانوا بيتشاوروا وقسموا الأدوار. ده طبعا نتج بعد ما إنهم تعرفوا على المشكلة في المجتمع المحلي هي شنو، قرروا إنه يعكسوها عبر المسرحية وبعد ذاك تمشي للخطوة الجاية. العملية دي ذاتها بتتم في 3 مراحل حنشوفها في اللقطة الجاية. المرحلة الأولى هم بيتناقشوا فيما بيناتهم، بيقسموا الأدوار. المرحلة الثانية بنسميها مرحلة الصورة الثابتة، اللي هم بيبدوا عملية بتاعت إحماء للاستعداد للدخول في الدور بأنه بيصوروا لنا بشكل لقطة ثابتة أو لقطة فوتوغرافية. بعد ذلك بنخش في عملية بتاعت الأكشن أو اللي هي المسرحية ذات التمثيلة وتجسيدها في الدراما اللي حتنزل للمجتمع. ده كله كتجهيز انت بتجهزه كعامل مع المجتمع المحلي في محلك ذاته، في الجمعية، في الجامعة، قبل ما تنزل. يعني العملية بتاعت الإحماء والتجهيز دي عملية أساسية ومهمة لازم تتم من كل الناس المشاركين في مسرح السرد، لأنك انت ممكن تنزل للمجتمع ما جاهز بالدور.
يعني قبل ما ما تعمل الحاجة اللي تبغى تسوي الحاجة مش هي حاجات كده ما تقول برضه ما تسمع الكلام. واضح قلبي حقاري.
كويسة؟
أي الحمد لله.
طيب يا أمي، ها الدواء علي جابه؟
علي أنا شفته. علي لو 3 أيام.
اقعدوا ساعة يا ولاد، خلوني نتكلم مع أمي شوي. اقعدوا.
أسكتوا. ضحكتوني كرهتوني.
امشوا العبوا برا، امشوا العبوا برا، خلونا نتكلم. امشوا. يا ناهد وسلمى العبوا برا، خلونا نتكلم. يا اطلعوا عليكم، الله اطلعوا برا.
خليهم يلعبوا برا شوي. خارتي العي والله ننضرين ورجال.
اها يا أمي. الحاجة المهمة الدايرة أقولها لما أخذنا التدريب في الورشة الأولى وكان إننا يا داب بنسمع عن مسرح السرد وما عارفين بيتعامل كيف، كان إحساسي إنه دي حاجة صعبة أنا ما ممكن أطبقها. أنا هعملها كيف؟ هعمل الشغل ده كيف؟ الطريقة بتاعته، تقبل المجتمع له، ودي فكرة جديدة أول مرة تتعامل في السودان، الناس هتلاقيها كيف؟
عشان نيجي ننفذ مسرح السرد في أشياء أساسية لازم نحطها في بالنا ونحطها في اعتبارنا، ونحط في راسنا دائما إنه ممكن يكون عندهم حاجات مثلا في الاحتفالات بالطبيعة إذا كان بيفضلوا إنه يبدأ بالقرآن الكريم، لأنه نحن حنبدأ طوال بالقرآن الكريم، أو نخليهم يبدوا، نخلي يعني المشاركة بيناتنا تفاعلية منذ البداية. إذا افتتح البرنامج ممكن نخليهم ذاتهم يشاركوا المشاركات الأساسية في البرنامج.
محبوبة من كل الحارة، محبوبة من كل الحارة، كل البنات غيرتني.
الجديد في النارتيف ثياتر أو مسرح السرد إنه استصحب منهجيتين أساسيتين. المنهجية الأولى إنك أنت بتشتغل من الموارد الموجودة في المجتمع المحلي، يعني بتستثمر الأغاني الموجودة في المجتمع المحلي، الحكم الموجودة في المجتمع المحلي، التمثيليات الموجودة في المجتمع المحلي، الرقص الموجود في المجتمع المحلي، وبتوظفه لخدمة قضية معينة بيعاني بها المجتمع. الغرض من ده كله انك انت بترفع الكفاءة من قدر المجتمع المحلي انه يحل مشكلته بنفسه. يعني بدل تجي انت من برا تفقد عليه وتقول له والله مسألة العنف الأسري دي حقه تحلوها بكذا وكذا وكذا، نحن نبدأ نتكلم مثلا نستثمر أغنية زي بنية الحسابة.
فأنا عملت التقييم لمجتمع الفتح. فبعد عملت التقييم لمجتمع الفتح بأنه قعدت مع مجموعة حوالي 20 امرأة، فكان عبارة عن جروب ديسكشن، فوكس جروب ديسكشن. كان النقاش حوالين إنه المشاكل اللي بتلاقيهم شنو، والمصادر الموجودة في المجتمع عندهم شنو، والعلاقات الاجتماعية في المجتمع، والمشاكل السابقة اللي مرت بهم وكيف حلوها، وعن المشاكل اللي بتواجه الفئات اللي ممكن نقول عليها هي الفئات الهش الأكثر عرضة للمشاكل. فبعد عملت الجلسة بتاعت النقاش دي مع المجتمع بتاع الفتح في الفتح واحد، كانت أكثر الناس بيعانوا من مشكلة غياب الأب من البيت.
يعني فقد الأبو ده حاجة طبعا ما بتتعوض أبدا، بالذات يعني للبنات وفي سن يعني زي سني كده وأصغر مني. فيعني الوحدة لما تفقد أبوها بتكون حاسة بالوحدة، لكن يعني الحمد لله إنه أنا لقيت أخوي وساعدني ووقف جنبي كتير وما خلاني أحس بالفقد ده. لكن برضه يعني ما في زول بيقدر يعوض حنان الأب، لأنه الناس كلهم بتتكلم وتقول عينه إذا حصلت غلطة صغيرونة من غير قصد، يعني بيقولوا إنه عينه عشان أبوها ما هي عملت كده، يعني هي تكون ما قصدها إنها تعمل الحاجة دي، فهم بيقولوا ده من فقد الأب. ونحن عانينا كثير من المشاكل دي، وإن شاء الله اللي بعدين ما يعانوا منها يا رب.
لما يكون رب الأسرة غير موجود بنحس بالكرام.
فبدينا اليوم بإنه طلعنا نحن الناس اللي عملنا التدريب ده، الرول بلاي اللي عملناه في القاعة، بدينا به ونحن هناك في المجتمع، لأنه ده أول مرة نطبق مسرح السرد، فما طلبنا من المجتمع يطلع يمثل، مثلنا لهم نحن في البداية المشكلة اللي هو قالوا هي مشكلته.
مسألة ثانية من القروش عليك؟
هتسوي شنو وشوي ترسمسيها معي فاضلة ما في الهمدي، لكن قال لقيته يساعدني قدامه، يساعدني قدام فرضي ويشال حالي وكشف ستري.
خلتني من أعمل شنو أبوي دمي ما مرق من البيت وخلى البيت ده نحن بقى ما عندنا قروش وما عندنا حل غير الدين، والناس دول الأكل لحمنا في الحلة يا أمي. أنت أسحهم قلت قالوا لي كده أنا أسحهم بعدين ما أقدر أشوفهم بس معاهم. يا أمي أنا ما قادرة أذاكر وأعيش كده يا أمي، أنا خلاص تعبت من العيشة دي.
صرتي انكشري؟
ما قادرة يا أمي، أنا ما قادرة أسافر أعيش عيشة يا أمي. كل يوم أبوي ده نضرب ولا تعالي يا أبوي تعالي قول لنا ما جاي يا أمي، تشوفي لنا حل الموضوع ده يا أمي.
أنا أسوي شنو؟
أنت عندك جنيه معك.
يا قلبي.
ده شنو حاسبة؟
يا أخي عادة ما لهاش كتير.
ده شنو اللي عندك؟ ده شنو؟
اسكت خلونا نتكلم معاهم. بعدين نشوف عادي ده جاب العلاج ولا لا، خلونا. يا عمي.
بركة جيد يعني.
ثم أخبارك شنو إن شاء الله طيبة؟ يا باسم.
عيني ورمات كيفي؟ عين رجلي ورمات يا علي جاي أموت.
وأبوي أخباره شنو يا جماعة أبوي؟
تلعبوا برا شو؟
القروش كده. وما عليكم. شو من هنا؟
بعد خلصنا التمثيلية سألناهم إنه الحاجة دي بتشبهكم، الكلام اللي عملناه ده مشكلتكم حقيقة. فبقى بعد ذاك باب النقاش مفتوح، فكل زول من الناس الموجودين بيقول رأيه. الغالبية أو أجمع الناس اللي في المجتمع كلهم على إنه دي مشكلتهم، وبعد ذاك بيقوا ورونا الآثار الناتجة من المشكلة. الشباب حكوا عن الآثار والنسوان والأطفال، وكان المجتمع متعاون.
المسرحية اللي قالت لي حاصلة بالمجتمع.
يعني أنا بعد الحاجة دي قبل كده عشتها لو سنتين كده يعني دكيت المدرسة واشتغلت وصرفت على إخواني وحاجة بالشكل ده.
المجتمع حسية وأمهات تعاملها بعتذر لأمهات عن غيابة العملية نحن مقصرين وجزاكم الله.
So it is at moments like this that I know that we have to take courage from what is happening and the way people are helping themselves despite a lot of really serious problems that can be very overwhelming. The problems we saw people discuss today are not small problems, they are big problems. The people sat together, they discussed critically, they found some solutions for themselves, and through the songs and through the presentations, through the logos they were presenting, they were encouraging each other to stay strong under very harsh circumstances. Wherever we are, we can learn from the people here, and I hope that there's a way that we can continue to keep each other strong. Thank you.
بعد ما حكينا أو بعد ما سمعنا منهم أن انتهى النقاش، وريناهم إنه نحن بعد ده عاوزين نتقسم، وريناهم إنه نحن مفروض تاني تكون في تمثيلية للقصة العمراء بالصورة الإيجابية أو الأدوار اللي هم بيتمنوا إنها تكون هي كقصة بديلة لغياب الأب. القصة البديلة للمشكلة دي تكون شنو؟ فطلعوا مجموعة من أفراد المجتمع، مجموعة فيها نساء وفيها أولاد وفيها أطفال، مثلوا الدور الثاني للقصة البديلة alternative story، عكست الحلول اللي ممكن تطلع من المجتمع نفسه، لأنه نحن عارفين مسرح السر دائما الحل بيجي من المجتمع.
أنا وين معقولة تشتغل يعني عمرنا أنا هطلع من المدرسة أكثر أصلا عليهم وأنا مش هشتغل أنا.
لا يا ولدي لا يا ولدي كده مستقبل. أنت كده مضيع المستقبل، اشتغل أنا أضحي أنا وأمه.
الأمر الآخر في مسرح السرد إنك أنت بتتعامل مع المجتمع كله، من الأطفال الصغار بتخلي الكبار يسمعوا صوتهم، ومن الراجل الكبير للنساء للرجال الأولاد الشباب، فما بتستثني مجموعة. فأنت بعد ما تعمل المسرحية أو تعمل النشاط اللي أنتوا بصدده بعد ذلك بتتقسموا لمجموعات.
نترابط مع بعض، نترابط على مستوى الأسرة، نترابط على مستوى الحي، على مستوى المجتمع، عشان احنا نرفع بلدنا فوق. مجموعاتنا الترابط وشعارنا الآيات المشاركة مع بعض.
شعارنا شجر اليوميات. مجموعتنا اسمها الأطفال الصغار وشعارنا الوردة.
نحن كان جلسنا مع مجموعة الشباب والأولاد الشباب، ومفتكرين إن دي المجموعة اللي عليها زي ما بيقولوا الآمال، ديل شباب المستقبل، ديل هم آباء المستقبل، رجال البيت. فدايما نشوف كان وجهة نظرهم شنو. فأنت بتبدأ مثلا بأنه تكون معاهم مجموعة، المجموعة هم برامج ادوها اسم، اختاروا لها شعار. طبعا الشعار كان ممثل للقوة في الشباب، الطاقات اللي فيهم، بدل قاعدين حتى في الإجازة دي ما مستثمرين وقتهم، بيقوا قالوا خلاص احنا والله مجموعتنا دي مجموعة الوعد، حيكون عندها شعار، حنشتغل دقطوف نتبرع به للأسر الأبوم شرد منهم والأم براء، حنلف نشوف نحصرهم في الحلة وبعدين نتحرك نشتغل معهم.
كانت مشاركة فعالة من أفراد المجتمع من كل الفئات العمرية، فدي كانت نقطة كويسة، وأسسنا من الحاجة دي لأنه هنجي نعمل تاني جلسات أو هنعمل تاني مسرح في المرات الجاية، وأسسنا لأنه مجموعاتنا اللي كوناها واللجان اللي كوناها نعمل تقييم للمرات الجاية.
في حاجات استفدنا منها من خلال الجلسة بتاعت يوم أمس، إنه لقينا مفاتيح أو تكنيك يعني نقوم نستخدمه مع كيف نخش على المجتمع وكيف نبدأ الحوار معاه وكده عشان نستثير ونطلع الحياة اللي احنا من أجلها أصلا دارين نقوم نحل المشاكل أو نساهم في حل أو معالجة القضايا.
مدهش بالنسبة لنا هو شغل بتاعنا كيف تعالج مجموعة من الناس أو ما عرفته إيهم بالتدخلات المجتمعية عن طريق الناراتيف سيادة. استفدنا كثير إنك كيف تقرأ أفكار الناس، إنك كيف تخلي الناس تفكر بطرق إيجابية. كنا زمان بنحاول نحل للناس مشاكلهم، بنحيث نقول لهم ده صح وده خطأ، وده ما بيجي لأنه ده نظرتك أنت للشيء شايفه كيف، والهم نظرتهم بتكون مختلفة. فلما أنت تحاول تغير تفكير الناس ده شيء جميل، إنه هم بيستطيعوا إنه يجيبوا حلول من ذاتها منطقية بتكون مرضية بالنسبة لهم، وبالتالي بيكون عالج مشكلتهم بطريقة كويسة. ده الشيء الجديد اللي احنا تعلمناه من الشغل ده.
لو عايز ولا بغيمة أسعد الناس بوجودي، لا 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 لا. لو عايز ولا بغيمة أسعد الناس بوجودي، لو عايز ولا بغيمة أسعد الناس بوجودي، لا لا.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk today. It feels, on one hand, like I want to be really silent, so much has been said already. I try to listen very carefully because the question that was posed at the beginning was a question of what don't we know yet, or what do we need to bring forward, or how do we need to bring that together. So I tried to listen quite carefully to all the presentations, made lots of notes, and in the end thought all of those are really important, and maybe I'd rather link on a bit to what hasn't been said yet, and also invite from the floor in our discussion time other themes, issues and things that you think hasn't been raised yet that could help us to bring together this idea of peace and psychosocial work, mental health, and what I want to bring in a bit is integrated development approach. But what I've also learned from listening to people quite carefully, it's been such an intense space with, I go to conferences quite often, and this has been really unique. This, the quality of what people have brought, their vast experience, the dialogue that happens, the fact that we don't break out into small groups, that we're sitting in one room, that people are putting their own stories and vulnerabilities and making the person visible, all of that has been very impressive. And I also wanted to situate myself. I'm born from Dutch parents who both went through the Second World War and who decided to keep silent when we were living in South Africa because politics was dangerous and really didn't serve us a very good purpose for that. The result was that my brothers went into the army, were for 2 years, 18 months on the borders, indoctrinized, racist, unable to speak to lots of conflicts in the family. I was working at Wits University, this is sort of the 70s, 80s, and I was, by definition, therefore, a terrorist. Not only a communist, but a terrorist and impossible to talk to. So that made it, for a long time I only spoke to the children of my brothers at family occasions. I somehow felt I should be able to live this work, but I didn't know how to connect, like you were saying, how does one connect across gaps that there exist. And it was interesting that my father decided not to stay in the Netherlands because he was recruited to go into the army, and his history teacher had said to him that he was going to be canon Kanon fodder.
Cannon fodder.
Yeah. What is that in English?
Cannon fodder. Yeah.
And he actually had a very strong anti-military stance, but he didn't convey that to my brothers, and we didn't speak about politics at home. So it's interesting how that has played itself out in our family lives. On a more personal level as well, despite having done this work for a long time, I was also in, when people were talking about their own stories, I lost my son unexpectedly, and had a very, there were two things from that have been very influential for me. And the one is that it was the young people. I think if it wasn't for the young people in his life, I probably wouldn't even have been standing here talking. He was in Taiwan at the time. He was part of an international little community, and over a 3-4 day period, one of the people there was Japanese. They folded 1,000 origami cranes to send him off in the spirit that happens in Japan. Such a healing ritual. But the way in which they did it over those 4 days, they were coming in and out of the apartment, they were talking, they were eating, they went off to work, they came back, they put me on the back of a scooter, they took me to where he worked, the yoga that he did, whatever he was doing. They embraced me in his world, and they celebrated his life. And I got to see what that was, and it made all the difference. Back home, I was surrounded by people, experts in the field dealing with loss and trauma and those kind of things. And I didn't want anybody near me. It took me a long time. I wanted to work it out with my son. It was like he was, when I carried him, he was an unknown entity. When I gave birth to him, I didn't recognize his face, and I thought I knew him so well. And now it was going the other way around. He was going back in me in a different way. We opened a different way of finding each other and communicating, and no one else could help me with that. I wrote poetry. I, in the end, wrote a paper about it because somebody said to me, no one has spoken about when people do it on their own. And it was more, it wasn't that I was finding a new way, but what I was asking for is allow people the space, and what I said, to create their own requiem. Give the support and give the time. And I will never forget that, because it was a very humbling experience for me again. There are no easy answers. It's good to put our collective ideas together. It's good to create spaces. Being listened to if people want to be listened to, heard, seen, but supported in whatever way people want to be supported. And that's my personal positioning in this. Within 6 months, I also lost two very important mentors that I had. It was Michael White, as the founder of narrative therapy. It's a very great influence on my work, and we were friends and colleagues. And Andy Gilbert, who some of you may know, a community health psychologist from South Africa, and I'm going to talk about some of the work I did with him. But that it felt like, it feels, I think this thing that people say it's not an event and it happens within a context and many other things happen at the same time. It's not easy. So all of these things have an influence. So yes, that kind of goes on to me this is a bit of a narrative, a bit of a story, and I heard the importance of story very strongly from the first conversations that we had at the beginning with Prof. Pumala and Prof. Mark and other people. And I wanted to say just something about the narrative paradigm in recognizing what we've heard, the long history, the recent history, what's happening now, how do we make the very next step forward to stay in action, and how do we develop a vision on the long term, and how can we maybe collectively do that together. And if we come in from it from different paradigms, if we come in some from a psychosocial aspect, some from peace building, I want to talk about how integrated development started playing an important role, because it is in the movement of small actions every day that things happen. We have collectively a responsibility to try and join the dots, to make sense of this whole narrative. And one of the people we have to join the dots for are our donors, who fund us for specialized activities, for who we write particular reports, who want concrete solutions in a short time. And really, in many of the presentations we heard from Prof. Mick yesterday, from many other examples, it is if there's been investment over a longer time that there can be a difference. And how do we explain this to the donors? And how do we explain that if we look at it, when we said from an individual and community perspective, if we really look at it from the person's perspective and the community's perspective, people's lives aren't in those categories. They don't say, now I'm dealing with peace, now I'm dealing with reconciliation, now I'm dealing with the anger. People live their lives. And that's why the narrative, if we look at it from the point of view that we saw in Dr. Amal's presentation just now, from what the community bring, and listen and respect that and respond to that. In this case, if we work in that paradigm. So in that case where absent fathers was raised as a problem, the real priority problem was actually genital mutilation. But you don't go in the first time and work up. People say that's our highest problem. And you say, what do you want to work with? I wanted to work with absent fathers. That was safer. There the trust relationships get built, and then you move on to, like a process you would have been in a therapeutic process. But to be alongside, I heard words of outsider, insider, I think alongsider as B-sider is an important concept. I'm getting a 10-minute sign because I haven't started my presentation yet. But I've said a lot of the things I want to say. Yeah, okay, this is joining the dots. Yeah. So, going back to this one, I think for all of us, we were saying there are different angles to come in at it. We can come in from individual, we can work with a household, we can work with a group or family, a committee, community, society. But within all of those contexts, there is a timeline that we're dealing with, and that there is a personal history and a historical history available to us. I just want to say for people who do want to know that War Trauma has a lot of training materials that are downloadable on their site around the individual to collective healing, around the narrative theatre and many other training materials that you haven't mentioned yet, so I'll advertise you. Thank you. And the one thing that's been quite interesting, and I also think it's worth listening to, I was surprised last night, I said to my colleagues, that we were also so focused and in the conversation, because the issues we're dealing with are heavy and big, the problems are big, and there were a lot of problem-saturated stories, and it's going to drain our energy away altogether. And we had the lovely photograph of your children yesterday. Everybody was talking about it and looking up and smiling, and we desperately in need also of the strength-based stories, of interventions where we can get energized, where we can get hope. It's through the energy that we raise by people remembering what their strengths are, what their capabilities are, that we're able to approach the problems people are experiencing. And whether we go in from the individual and then through the individual to the community, like you didn't mention, Dr. Amal, that you have cross-reference in your work. So people are seen maybe in the clinic and go back to the community, or are seen in the community and identified as needing specialized care and then going back. And this whole sense, people have been speaking about it, of collective, or of identity. There's also collective identity, and you were speaking about that as well. And in the work, we see that we're actually working up in, if we look at it from a theoretical space, that we go, for every time you do something around identity, you've got to do something around action. So you move from a landscape of identity to a landscape of action, to keep the momentum going and to allow an opportunity for things to anchor. I think that all of us, whatever we're doing, are in a reflexive space, and some mention has been made around the importance of relationships. So this is about the interpersonal reflexivity, where it's been helpful for us to at any time stop and think about ourselves, our organizations, the place that we're in, and look at how, in the one sense, how's power operating? Who has it? How's it being used? Not all power is bad. Do you know when you step into a position of power? When you asked me about the teaching, I said, do the facilitators know that they carry, already by just standing there, a certain amount of power, that they may have to break down if that's what they want, if they want people to feel stronger? How does it operate? Do you understand it? Do you understand the effect of what you do? The values have been raised. People lose a sense of values, or can't live those values, or don't know how to deal with the dilemmas, the victim, the perpetrator. How do we develop a moral compass through our work? Unless we try and trace it, unless we name it, unless we try and allow it to help us by speaking about it, that when we get to a particular situation, we can use that moral compass to help us make decisions. The negotiating accountability and responsibility. It is a negotiation process. Who's accountable for what, and how will that accountability be shown? We can say people are responsible. Yesterday you said, I'm going to make a provocative remark. I'm going to say, it doesn't matter what happened to you, mothers are responsible for their children. And it was an uncomfortable notion to sit with. Yes, it is true, but in this case I want to plead for, can we look at the word responsibility and put it into the ability to respond? How do we create a platform so that people are able to respond before we call on the responsibility? So, if we place that kind of, we can do that in any work we're doing. We're doing ability in terms of a narrative paradigm. The sharing of stories has also come up as can we tell stories again? Will we re-traumatize people if they tell their stories again? And it very much depends on context. And I can't go into the detail, but I have had the opportunity I work with life stories of postgraduate students. And because we live in such a violent society, a lot of stories are coming out around violence. And I became very uncomfortable whether that was okay to happen or not, and whether people wanted that to happen, and checking that retrospectively 2 years later. And the message was very clear. We really needed our story to be told. It was the first time we told it. There wasn't anybody else around us that we were going to upset. In this case, there was a lot of mothers being held responsible for not doing something about the trauma their daughters were experiencing, or being witness to it and not responding. Or the cultural, I think Webster spoke about cultural violence, or what did you call it, Webster? Yeah. How that happens, and not understanding it. And then one of my colleagues from that has just been in Jordan was saying he was doing a lot of interviews in the camps, and he was also worried that people were being re-traumatized and checking with them if they really wanted to share this. And they also said, we really want you to hear. And if you create a respectful, supportive, acknowledging space, that becomes possible. I just want to now, the last 5 minutes, talk as a continuation of what you saw from the previous film. In this case, in Dr. Amal's case, it's the university that was in the driving seat, selected organizations and worked in communities and areas. In Burundi's case, it was an organization that took the initiative and worked with communities, and it unrolled slowly over time. This organization is called Center Ubuntu, and their whole mission is about rebuilding values and acknowledgement, and that from there you'll be able to do a whole lot of other things. And they were very clever in how they got their funding too. War Trauma was able to support them over a number of years, which was great, in very small amounts, but to keep the momentum going. But they were doing peace work, actually. They were doing leadership work. They were doing healing work. And they would tell whichever donor what they wanted to hear so that they could carry on doing their work with great integrity. Humble people that are really passionate about the work. I continued having conversations with them last week to say, how could we bring your voice in here? What would you like us to say? What have you heard? So I do want to acknowledge their voice, and I wish some of them could have been present today. Oh, really? Who? Frey Manuel? Annie said, talk to the people who do the work. Anyway, Burundi is having real problems, as you know, at the moment, and they're not moving from home. It's too dangerous to leave the houses with the election problems that are happening at the moment. But what happened with the work as it unfolded is that it was in this context that the importance, and we haven't spoken about that yet, of committees became evident. So yesterday we spoke of between the individual and the community, there's family, extended family. In this case for the work, they're committees. These committees are elected by the people to deal with the issues that are raised within that community that they want to deal or that they want to work with. And over time, it became more and more important. The committees are voluntary, that their work became more defined, they needed more skills on how could they respond to that. And these are the main things that they were working, that kind of emerged. They had to work with the formal and informal leadership. They provided some first aid, mental health care. They would refer people if they couldn't speak, refer a person if they saw more serious problems. They were involved in conflict resolution and peace building to a small extent. If it was political, they couldn't be involved. It's a complex area. People were not apolitical themselves, but where could they intervene and how? I can't go into that, and I think that has been raised enough times. In this case, how the issues were showing themselves was through alcohol abuse, domestic violence, hate speech, rape, discrimination, all kind of secondary effects, and that is where the committee could play a role in changing things. When they were working with the leadership, there are different kinds of leaders, and for every context that's different. So here you were dealing with the chief, the local administration, the political leader, the informal leader, the wise men, that where actually the first consultation happened, where there was a lot of respect, that started an organic process of mediation. That also important for the committee to know who all the actors were in the area, who else could they use, who could they refer to, if it was around income generating or whatever the case may be. And after a while they wanted to know, how do we know what, if we're managing to do what we're doing, how can we learn from each other? And this kind of spider web evolved, where the areas were identified as we work in leadership, we work with conflict, we work around some development issues, we work with values, and especially when they get expressed as problematic behaviors, and then we work with trauma. And the organization and with their committees would map themselves the organizations themselves said, okay, we're working on a scale from 1 to 5. If there's no activity, we're near the center. If we're very active, we're near the end. And each organization or committee or area had its own strengths. So the maps looked very different for each person. So some people, for instance, the green one here is, so this particular group was very good with the developmental activities. And what they did was they worked with goats. And they worked with a project where they would pair a Hutu and a Tutsi person. They would give a pregnant goat, and the pair would be responsible for the goat, and whatever goats came out of that belonged to the pair. But it was said to people from the beginning, you don't have to like each other, you just have to make this work. By being relieved of we have to like each other, through working together, having a shared product, actually the relationships were built. And they became more ceremonial in how they would proudly show when a baby goat was born and had celebrations around it. There are other examples of that that Anisette mentioned to me last week. He said, yes, we could look at things like building a public toilet where we have meetings to discuss conflict. Everybody has to use a toilet. And by saying from all the groups, we've got to construct these toilets, he says, so the toilets are showing that there's some peace action happening. Because basically down, we're all human. And yeah, this is one of our products. Another one was a bridge building. Okay. So my question I want to just say this. It's reminded me. I think one of the things was about understanding that if problems present themselves, there was a very big problem around people being called lazy and that not being connected to trauma, and breaking that stigma through kind of intervention. So the questions I wanted to pose to the group is, are there other approaches that we haven't heard of that are also either haven't heard of that are important or provide energy that you may want to share? A question that maybe we'll come to later in the day, what is our overall goal as a group coming together from all these different perspectives? What do we call that? How do we present that? How do we create an identity that we can put to our donors and into our projects? Yes.
Be here. Yesterday, I thought, do I rush up to my room and prepare for my presentation, or do I sit and listen to the presenters? And I chose to sit and listen to the presenters because I've been learning so much from you, and it's been extremely moving. Like Yvonne said, it is a different type of conference in that we're learning so much, but we're also getting the personal stories. Now, in terms of the work that I'm going to present, I've just recently finished collecting data in South Sudan on a study that was focused on truth, justice, reconciliation, and healing. The study was conducted by the South Sudan Law Society, led by the research director of the South Sudan Law Society, David Deng. I was among the researchers of the group. When they first drafted the proposal for looking at the issue of truth, justice, reconciliation, and healing, trauma wasn't included as one of the variables that might influence the people's perceptions of truth, justice, reconciliation. So I suggested to the South Sudan Law Society that perhaps this is something that we need to look at, because from my experience in South Sudan, as you've heard, I've been there since approximately 2005. The one thing that really stands out from just walking the streets, from just talking to the people, is the toll the crisis has taken on the people. It's something that you feel, you sense, and it's really hard to get away from. I've not met anyone that has not been affected on some level by the country's long history of violent conflict. So that fact is known. However, it's actually not well understood, and I think that's been one of the challenges. I came to the research on trauma because of my interaction with donors, my interaction with the agencies, my interaction with the security, the UN Security Council, the assumptions that are being made about the people. What's missing in the assumption is any idea of the emotional or well-being, the mental health issues. Yet, in a conflict area, it's actually a very important factor. I guess I'll just begin describing this study. Okay, now this study, we had about 1,500 respondents, covered the 3 main regions of the country, the Greater Belkys, Upper Nile, and Equatoria. The gender breakdown was about half and half, 51% women, 49% men. Age range 18 to 86. Most were married, 80%. 47% reported no schooling, 43% some primary or secondary, 10% some university. Around 70% of the households live on less than $1.25 a day. 21% reported no household income. Among the respondents, around 41% are currently displaced, 36% were previously displaced, 22% were never displaced. Now, when you think about this issue of displacement, I mean, someone, I think it was yesterday or perhaps the day before, mentioned land issues and how important that is. And for many of us who are coming from the outside, I come from the U.S., from America, from the New World. We move. We're descendants from other areas. I find that people coming from the outside don't fully understand the relevance of the land issues, not just for because of destruction, but the ancestral ties and what it means to pull these people out and for them not to be allowed or to go back home, or to feel that they can't go back home or not have the means to go back home. I think that it's just a level of devastation that is hard to understand for outsiders. Now, when we're thinking about the conflict in South Sudan, and you're thinking through the context, I think the context is really important. Now, we've heard about the recent fighting. It's a civil war that started with a struggle among the political leaders, but then erupted into a fighting that broke out along ethnic lines. That's not the only battle that's going on. When we went throughout the country, what we found is that some people, that wasn't really their main concern. Because in South Sudan, you have the big war, the civil war, However, you also have border issues are still being fought. You have intra-tribal fighting, and I'm not talking about the traditional cattle raiding. I'm talking about this. I'm talking about atrocities that are committed where everything is taken, people are killed, women are raped. So you have, in South Sudan at once, you have about every type of conflict, intertribal, cross-border, and then the greater war, all at the same time. And then when you think about the history, now I hear people saying there was about 50 years of war, and then there was the CPA years. And since I've been there, I have not known any time of peace because there has always been fighting. Between the time of the independence and this present breakout of war that happened in 2013, there was fighting, devastating fighting in Jonglei. There was fighting over the oil fields in Pantao, the Hijali, major fighting. And then you have the historical, the history. We think about the violence, but the issue of slavery is still something that needs to be considered. So, there's a long history of instability. There's current conflict, and what this has resulted in are very high levels of exposure to traumatic events among the people. Now, in our findings, what we saw is that 41% of our sample tested scored within the PTSD range. Among that 41%, most of the people were currently displaced. So the rates were higher among those who were currently displaced. 39% of previously displaced people scored within that range. Combatants also scored high on the PTSD range, but they scored significantly higher than those who were former combatants. So it seems that the people living presently under duress, under traumatic conditions, are scoring within the PTSD range. What we found is that at one of the POCs, the Boer POC, the rate was extremely high. The rate was over 90% scoring within the PTSD range. So we looked at that and said, okay, that doesn't sound right. Is that possible? And we concluded, yes, it is possible. Because when we looked at the exposure to traumatic events, now this is the percentages for the whole sample, but for the people of Boer, 89% had witnessed a family member being killed. It was about 93% had a close family member killed. 23% had 23% witnessed someone being raped. So the people from Boer, the Boer I think is a special case in many ways because of its history and because of the recent fighting where the area went from rebels to government, rebels and back to the government. And the people that are in the Boer POC, unlike the other POCs, they're not really able to move in and out. They're under more threat. The people that have moved out, have been arrested. Some women do move out, but not many. So I'm going to rush ahead because already I'm running out of time. But you know, the question that was posed for the talk today in terms about affected people and their abilities to, I guess, engage in peace building. I forgot the wording. I think it's important to think through, you know, how trauma affects people in relation to reconciliation. And what we found in the study is that, you know, people that scored within the PTSD range were significantly less likely to believe in peace talks as a resolution, as a possible way to resolve the conflict. People with higher exposure to traumatic events were less trusting of other ethnic groups. I'm fishing here for all my data, but I guess because I don't have much time, the gist of it is that that exposure to trauma, that PTSD levels do affect the way that other groups are perceived, do affect willingness to reconcile negatively. Interestingly, also, you know, what we found in this study is that that women were less trusting of other ethnic groups, less willing to live with other ethnic groups. And I think this, one thing that's really important about this finding, because this is also somewhat true, another study I did in Abyei, where women were significantly, their attitudes were more negative regarding their neighbors and enemies. I think the point I'm trying to make here, I'm looking at the time thinking, okay, let me rush here, is that the way we think about women in peace and conflict, you know, women aren't seen as part of the problem, okay? Women are seen, you know, as passive, and men are seen as the aggressors. However, what we see is that, you know, when these atrocities are committed, okay, I mean, who's culpable? I know we have the people that are actually committing the atrocities, but they're in a context, within a community. And there's a community that supports the ideas of the otherness, or the, you know, of pointing to the other people as less human, or the stereotyping. Now, and I see that this is something that happens, you know, through everybody, including the women. The women, you know, sing the men to war. The women pass on their ideas to the children, thinking about the intergenerational work. This is something that we need to understand. And this also speaks to the relevance of women in peace talks and the need to include them. I remember someone else talked about impunity, individual impunity. You know, and I think about, because when we look at justice, and when we look at these atrocities, we go for the criminals, but then the community somehow is absolved, yet they are also part of the conflict. I'm just going to rush ahead. There was other, just because there's no time here, but thinking through healing, and I know here we've been talking a lot about the individual. And what really interests me is healing in terms of the institutions, the structures, because what you have in South Sudan are weak structures in every respect, in terms of governance, in terms of justice, security, social services. They're either non-existent or broken, or, security. Well, the security forces are a source of insecurity for the people. So when you're thinking about healing, I'd like to think about affecting the environment. Because if the triggers for the trauma are still present, how can someone heal? I always think about this picture. I saw this drawing of the Buddha in the lotus position in calm meditation, but around the Buddha there's this storm, war, and the Buddha is calm, and I thought, now this is great, because this is the way it should be. This is the resilience that we're looking for, but that's the Buddha, and we're not the Buddha. So I think we need to think about affecting the environment. We need to look at institutional reform. We need to think about justice and healing, and a lot of the assumptions. We don't have really good evidence, in terms of this, you put the person in jail, there's closure, you feel, well, is that true? But if it's not, can it be true? I know with restorative justice, a lot of the mechanisms within restorative justice are supposed to lead to healing. I spent a lot of time with in the traditional courts, and I understand what was meant to happen, but a lot of times the processes were acrimonious and hurtful. This is not to say that it can't be restorative. Again, criminal trials were focused on the individual, but what happens to the collective? We have to think about the impunity of the accountability of the communities. And lastly, truth. Now everyone says, whose truth? Well, that's a good point, especially when you're thinking about people who are affected by trauma, PTSD, because it really does affect the person's cognitive abilities and how they process a higher order thinking, and even in a healthy mind. I know for some of you psychologists who've heard the totalitarian ego, we all make ourselves our heroes. In the stories, about the battle you had with your neighbor, your ex-husband, somehow you're always the good guy. This is the way we are. There's proof. This is our natural inclination. Now, what happens when the person is not well? So think about truth in terms of, people and wellness. Last thing, reparations, mental health support, and justice. I think that because when these crimes are committed, what they're trying to do is break the people. They're trying to break the rape, the ugliness of some of the crimes and how people are killed. They're trying to break the spirit of the people. So this is what they're trying to do then in order to rectify that, to repair. Reparations should include mental health support. I think I'll end there because I know we're running out of time.